There are thousands of prophecies in the Bible, and hundreds speak directly about the end times. But there is one prophecy from Jesus himself that many believers have misunderstood for generations. When he said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man," he wasn't merely offering a poetic comparison or reminding us of a familiar Sunday school story. He was pointing to a moment in history that revealed humanity at its darkest. A time so corrupted that God himself expressed grief for creating mankind. The days of Noah were not just about judgment. They were a warning, a blueprint of what spiritual decaying moral collapse and supernatural rebellion could look like when unchecked. And Jesus was highlighting the same patterns that would reemerge in the final generation. To understand why he referenced Noah, it is crucial to examine the world described in Genesis 6. Humanity had grown in number but was decaying spiritually. Scripture describes how the sons of God saw the daughters of men and took them as wives, a phrase that points not to ordinary human unions, but to celestial beings. Angels who had rebelled and crossed God's established boundaries. These unions produced the Nephilim, giants and warriors whose existence violated the natural order and struck terror across the land. These beings were not symbolic or mythical. Their presence was tangible, so imposing that when Israelite spies entered Canaan, they compared themselves to grasshoppers in their own sight. The Nephilim were predators who ruled through fear, violence, and domination. Beings that the ancient world referred to as titans or godmen, but Scripture calls them an abomination. The sin of the Watchers was not simply lust or rebellion. It was a strategic attack on humanity itself. The knowledge they imparted wasn't wisdom. It was corruption disguised as enlightenment. They taught sorcery, warfare, occult practices, astrology, and other forbidden knowledge that warped human hearts and saturated the earth with evil. Humanity became so steeped in wickedness that every intention of the thoughts of their hearts was continually evil. This level of corruption was not incidental, but directly threatened God's promise in Genesis 3:15 that a Messiah would come through the seed of the woman. The enemy's strategy was clear: corrupt the human bloodline so thoroughly that the Messiah could never arrive. The Nephilim were a hybrid race designed to distort God's image in humanity, undermining the potential for redemption. Amid this chaos, one man stood apart. Noah is described as righteous and blameless in his generation, with a lineage untouched by the pervasive corruption. This distinction was critical, because through Noah, the promise of redemption could continue. The flood, while an act of judgment, was simultaneously an act of mercy, preserving humanity from total destruction and halting the spread of the Nephilim. It was a divine intervention to protect the lineage through which Christ would eventually come. Yet, Scripture notes a chilling detail. The Nephilim were present not only before the flood but afterward as well. Their physical forms were destroyed, but the influence behind them persisted. Giants continued to appear, like Og of Bashan, whose bed measured over 13 feet, and the spies who saw descendants of Anak. These were remnants of the same corrupted bloodline, demonstrating that the rebellion of the Watchers returned in some form, whether through spiritual or genetic continuation. When Jesus spoke of the last days being like the days of Noah, he was referring to much more than a culture of indulgence or ignorance. The prophecy speaks to a deeper spiritual condition. Humanity is a moral decay, the crossing of boundaries meant to remain sacred, and the rise of supernatural deception. In Noah's time, divine and human lines blurred, and God's design was compromised. Today, we are witnessing a similar pattern. Wickedness is openly celebrated, violence is normalized, and morality is inverted. Beyond that, humanity is crossing boundaries in ways unprecedented since the flood. Gene editing, human-animal hybrids, and engineered intelligence traits reflect the same impulse. The Watchers exhibited an attempt to redefine what it means to be human, a rebellion against the image of God. Transhumanism and other modern technologies echo the ancient ambition to manipulate creation, while occult practices and spiritual deceptions are resurfacing under new blurring the lines between the natural and the supernatural. The days of Noah were defined by chaos, corruption, and widespread spiritual rebellion. And today, similar patterns are emerging with alarming precision. Humanity is increasingly detached from divine principles, and the natural order is being challenged both ethically and scientifically. Governments and institutions are acknowledging unexplained phenomena, spiritual encounters, and events that suggest the veil between the physical and spiritual realms is thinning. This mirrors the prophetic picture of Noah's time, where the world was unaware of impending judgment until it was too late. Even as the majority succumbed to corruption, a remnant remained, faithful and righteous. Just as Noah stood apart in his generation, this remnant preserved hope and ensured that redemption remained possible, demonstrating the importance of remaining steadfast in faith amidst pervasive darkness. The prophecy of the days of Noah also challenges us to reconsider what it means to be spiritually aware and morally vigilant. Observing these patterns today, from societal collapse to the pursuit of forbidden knowledge, reminds us that history is cyclical in its spiritual realities. Humanity is not only repeating behaviors but also revisiting the spiritual dynamics that existed before the flood, the merging of divine and human boundaries, the reintroduction of supernatural rebellion, and the distortion of what it means to be human are warnings that point to the necessity of discernment, righteousness, and a deep awareness of God's principles. Just as Noah's lineage preserved the possibility of redemption, those who remain faithful today stand as a living testimony that even in the darkest times, God's plan persists, and divine purpose cannot be thwarted by corruption alone. Looking closely at the parallels, it becomes clear why Jesus pointed to Noah. The days before the flood were not simply about human sin in isolation, they were about a complete spiritual and moral collapse, amplified by celestial rebellion and human complicity. The same themes are visible in modern developments: genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, the pursuit of immortality, and the return of occult knowledge. All these factors echo the ancient story, showing that humanity is again at a crossroads, where choices made today will determine the moral and spiritual direction of future generations. In this context, the prophecy serves not only as a warning but also as a call to vigilance, urging believers to recognize the spiritual atmosphere, understand the patterns, and maintain a stance of faith and obedience in the midst of a world increasingly dominated by chaos and deception. Jesus' reference to the days of Noah highlights the intersection of spiritual corruption, moral decay, and human ambition to transcend divine boundaries. By examining Genesis 6 and the consequences of the Nephilim's influence, we see how the enemy's strategy sought to corrupt God's image and prevent redemption. The flood was a necessary intervention, preserving the line through Noah, and the remnants of the Nephilim demonstrate the persistent nature of rebellion. Today's society is facing unprecedented ethical and spiritual challenges that mirror those ancient conditions, from genetic manipulation to societal inversion of morality. The underlying message remains consistent. Humanity must recognize the signs, understand the spiritual implications, and choose the path of righteousness, preserving the divine plan even when the majority follows corruption.